I'm not one to usually report on loot box news, but in this case I can kind of make the exception because it's kind of huge. So apparently EA is the target of a class action lawsuit filed in Canada over the use of loot boxes in its games. The lawsuit, available in full from the patch notes, describes loot boxes as a game chance inside of a video game, which defendants claim constitutes as a form of unlawful gambling. Gaming is strictly controlled and licensed in this country. In breach of these laws, the defendants have operated an unlicensed illegal gaming system through their loot boxes, the lawsuit states. Through this suit, the Canadian consumers seek to hold the defendants accountable for this unlawful conduct and to recover their losses. The suit has been filed on behalf of two plaintiffs, one in British Columbia and the other in Ontario, who have previously purchased loot boxes in EA's Madden NFL and a NHL series. It covers a much wider variety of games released between 2008 and the certification of the suit, however, including FIFA 09 to 21, Madden 10 to 21, NHL 11 to 21, NBA Live 14 to 19, UFC 2 and 3, Apex Legends, Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline, Battlefield 1, Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect 3, Mass Effect Andromeda, Need for Speed Payback, Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare and Garden Warfare 2, Plants vs. Zombies 2, It's About Time, Star Wars The Old Republic, Command & Conquer Rivals, Heroes of Dragon Age, Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, The Sims Mobile, and War Friends. It did say, interestingly enough, Battlefront 2, the game that kicked off a lot of mainstream backlash against loot boxes, is not on the list. Perhaps the system was reworked. There's a catch-all phrase too. Such other games developed and published by the defendants that may become known to the plaintiff. Loot boxes are considered part of the compulsion loop of game designed to keep players invested in a game. Such compulsion loops are known to contribute towards video game addiction, and are frequently compared to gambling addiction. The lawsuit says this is in part due to the use of a variable rate reinforcement schedule similar to how slot machines dole out prizes, and it's especially dangerous for children. The random element also makes players more likely to pay for the chance to win an item from a loot box. The suit says loot boxes, EA games, all function in a substantially similar fashion, noting that they're either purchased with real money or an intermediate virtual currency. Some loot box items provide in-game advantages, making them particularly desirable to players, but the suit implies that even items that don't affect gameplay have an insidious attraction. Apex Legends cosmetic items are associated with player prestige, and in particular, rare cosmetic items will provide a player with more prestige than common ones. Players who use the default avatars are looked down on by others. There is therefore an incentive for players to purchase multiple loot boxes in order to obtain more valuable and more prestigious rare cosmetic items. The suit makes allegations of unfair practices, unjust enrichment, and breaches of competition and consumer protection regulations, but it primarily hinges on the question of whether loot boxes constitute a form of gambling. It defends that position by pointing out that countries around the world, including Japan, Korea, Belgium, and the Netherlands, the UK, and the US, have all either taken action against the use of loot boxes or made moves toward doing so, but it's still an unanswered question in most jurisdictions. Because of that, the case has the potential to have a major impact as a precedent setter in Canada, which could lead the Canadian government to take action to regulate loot boxes or penalize EA directly, or the result could be the determination that loot boxes aren't gambling. The lawsuit seeks restitution of the benefits received by the defendants in the full amount of the takings, which seems optimistic, or in the alternative, disgorgement of the benefits received by the defendants on account of the wrongdoing, as well as other damages and compensation, and various injunctions against the use of loot boxes in games. Before all that, however, the suit must be certified as a class action. There's no time frame on that, but we'll keep our eyes open. I've reached out to Electronic Arts for comment and will update if I receive a reply. Now, the big thing is that Battlefront 2 was not on this list. Now, of course, like back in the day when, you had the older FIFAs and Maddens, it was kind of like one of them things where loot boxes was kind of merely innocent at that time. But now they've grown to the point where it's almost like an insidious taboo if you try to have it in your game. It was kind of shocking that Battlefront 2 was not in there. I mean, it was in there, but I think it's because they reworked the entire progression system. But I think by the time the backlash, grew to the height it did, it was too late, And honestly, Payback being on this list is not surprising, because they have not, that game kind of flew under the veil of Battlefront 2 shadow. So it kind of didn't get as much notoriety as Battlefront 2 did. It did receive some outrage, from myself included, because the loot boxes were indeed tied to progression. If you did not open the loot box, the grind would be insufferable. And on top of that, the loot boxes were connected to the internet. So if you didn't have a good internet connection, well, you would be in a grinding game, that kind of, it was just so grindy, and I could go on and on about the game. I've talked about it before. But Battlefront 2, the game that kind of kick-started all of this, and this is the game that I kind of sit and point, you don't necessarily need to boycott to prove a point. You could be outraged to the point where it gets this big. And I've stated this before, and I'll state it again. If Battlefront 2 never received the outrage it got, we would have never gotten this far. We wouldn't be where we're at today with a Canadian lawsuit. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that outrage. And some people may say it's, the exception to the rule, whatever. But the thing is, it kind of pretty much tipped the scales a bit, to the point where now, loot boxes are, a taboo. Nobody wants to put loot boxes in their games, and they shouldn't. I'm not going to tell people don't buy games with loot boxes. The most I'll do is say, don't buy the loot boxes if you don't fuck with them. But if you want to buy the game, it is what it is. Because I understand people like to use the whole notion of, you speak their language, money, they'll listen. But Battlefront 2 is a prime example of why you don't necessarily have to speak their language to rattle their cages. If you were to at least have outrage get so massive to the point that it got with Battlefront 2, it would be a lot of shit that wouldn't be happening. I mean, I think microtransactions wouldn't even exist if, a lot of people was outraged to this level. But it's always a case in point that I like to, point to anytime someone wants to say, it don't matter if you are outraged or whatever. I mean, outrages work more than a boycott, because we all know boycotts, they don't never work. And until someone actually points to me to a time in which you boycotting the game actually did something, and I don't mean you as an individual, I mean that's collective. When did it really matter? It don't, because there could be a lot of times you can boycott a game, and let's say you hear that game you boycotted sold 10 million copies. It could take the wind out of your sails and make you feel defeated. Like, damn, it still sold that much. Hell, Battlefront 2 still sold 7.2 million despite the outrage. But at the same time, the outrage was that massive to the point where it grew into this global phenomenon almost. But all in all, I will say this: outrages will work way more than a boycott. If you don't like something that somebody's doing in the game, whether it's a bad business practice, mostly bad business practices like loot boxes or microtransactions, let your voice be heard. And I guarantee you, if we were to have a Battlefront 2 situation every time there was egregious microtransactions being added to a game or being in a game day one, I guarantee you microtransactions would cease to exist, honestly.